All right. Hey, gang. Welcome back to the Vitality Hour. We have a super exciting episode today. Two of my favorite people on the whole planet. We got Barbara Williams and Jacie Gregory from the CIRS Group. And if you don't know, now you know. And these two juggernauts have been hanging around CIRSx and doing a fantastic job at really understanding the science-backed truth of screening, confirmatory labs, and treatment for the illness we all call CIRS, or Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. And they've really been helping shepherd those suffering CIRS, not even know they have CIRS yet, in the middle of CIRS, having tried random bait and switch cherry picking approaches to the Shoemaker protocol, get back on track, and everything in between. You are two of my heroes who help people get to graduation. So thanks for making some time for us today.
Thank you for having us on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, very exciting. Thank you.
So I got to be on the CIRS Group podcast. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and how people can access your support and brilliance.
So the CIRS Group was founded by Barbara and myself when we were diagnosed with CIRS, and we realized there was this gap in CIRS information. It wasn't very patient-facing at that time, and we wanted to make the information more accessible to the CIRS patient who has brain fog, difficulty learning, can't remember words. And so we created the CIRS Group because we were lucky enough to have each other for support. We thought other people may need that support as well. So we do have an online community of people who are healing from CIRS. And we also created the CIRS Group Instagram, which has, shout out to myself, cute infographics sharing the Shoemaker protocol and medical information. And we also have a podcast that comes out weekly, and we cover a variety of CIRS and CIRS adjacent topics.
Yeah. Yeah, Jacie and I, we were diagnosed like within a week of each other, or the same week. And so we were able to when I got all the information, I sent it to Jacie. I was like, what haplotype do I have? And then we found out we actually have the same genetic haplotypes, which was like cute. But we really helped each other out. And I think going through that experience together really made us realize how important community is. And, family doesn't always understand. Friends don't always understand. It's a hard thing to navigate. A lot of people don't know about CIRS yet. So we created the group so that people could come together. Everyone who shows up knows they can freely talk about CIRS, and everyone, is on the same page and going through the same thing and sharing resources and information. And it's been really great.
Yeah, I think one of the best things I love about your gram, and I follow you guys in the gram and your podcast, is that patients need to hear things 3 to 7 times before they start to digest and assimilate. And you're trying to get the illness, the multi-symptoms, the screening, the confirmatory labs, the protocol, and all the nuance and the steps of the protocol to become cellular knowledge for someone with CIRS. And as Dr. Bierke says, the CIRS patient has to become a student of the illness, really. So yes, it helps to have a good doctor and a good remediator and inspector, but at the end of the day, if you're not willing to study this illness a little bit in at least a blue collar lay biochemistry, you're not going to graduate. And we're looking as providers and one of the founders of the CIRSx conference for people to echo honest, data-driven, peer-reviewed, reproducible, published information. And every time I hear your posts, I'm like, I wouldn't have said it any different myself.
Nice.
Dr. Shoemaker. Woohoo, and this ability to just keep penetrating people's synapses and watching them get there first. I went from an F to a C- on cognitive function, and now you're there with these sound bites or hearing something another time or needing a pick-me-up and a good case study or story of graduation. It's just been awesome to watch you guys.
Thanks. Yeah, I think Jacie and I complement each other well because we do say things different ways. She will come at you with the science and the facts, and her memory is incredible for all the data that, to prove what it is that she's saying. And then I'll come in and say, yeah, so poop every day, guys. It's a good balance, I think.
Yes.
That we're hitting all sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, as we say at Roots and Branches, ABP. Always
Yep.
open.
Always be pooping.
If that biotoxin didn't go to the toilet, that immune system's not coming down. So even though you had so much to resonate and commiserate and understand and feel compassion toward each other when you first got diagnosed, my understanding is that you had what you might say a misdiagnosis in regards to to your story, Jacie.
Yeah, so when I first started getting sick with what I later realized was CIRS, it triggered an autoimmune condition for me. So I had what eventually was diagnosed as ankylosing spondylitis, which is a fancy way of saying I had uncontrollable diarrhea. I had uveitis, which is inflammation of the inner eye, so I couldn't see out of one of my eyes for a period of time. And then I had enthesis or enthesitis. I've heard it both ways, which is inflammation of tendons and ligaments. So I was walking with a cane for a while, and there was a period of time where I would just crawl out of bed every morning because it was so painful to move. And even after I moved past those symptoms, I was still unwell. And I remember having this meeting with my rheumatologist where I was like, we need to get this flare under control. Like, I can't live like this. I can't live in this much pain. And my rheumatologist said to me, I think we need to come to the realization or to the understanding that this might not be a flare for you. This might be your way of life for the foreseeable future. And I was so distraught at learning that and thinking I would be in that much pain for the rest of my life. And I remember just laying in bed at night when I couldn't sleep because I was in so much pain. And I would just say, like, God, if I have to suffer through this, please make it worth it. And it was a couple weeks after that that I was introduced to the idea of CIRS, and I started looking into it. And thank God for that diagnosis, because I don't know if I would be here on this planet today if I had to endure that level of pain for that period of time. But CIRS completely changed my understanding of my health and chronic inflammation. And through the CIRS protocol, through the Shoemaker protocol, I was able to resolve not only my CIRS symptoms, but I no longer have any of those autoimmune symptoms either.
Unreal. So for our DC listeners, our chiropractors and our physical therapists and our primary care, we all learn HLA-B27 is the haplotype or the immune response gene that's more associated with psoriatic arthritis and ankylosing spondylosis. And then you're supposed to get this bambooing of the spine on imaging, right? Did you fit into traditional AS stuff aside from those more gray area symptoms you talked about, or were they just like, we don't know what rheumatology bucket to put you in, so we're choosing AS?
I do have the HLA-B27 gene. They did do imaging, both X-ray and MRI. My rheumatologist told me that for some reason, women who present with AS typically don't have the spinal fusion that you would see in male AS patients. So they felt confident in diagnosing me with that with just the gene and the symptoms that I was presenting with. But no, I didn't have the visual confirmation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating because we see this a lot with MS. There's like three categories. There's CIRS that's masquerading as MS, and we've literally helped those people regrow their gray matter and stop the destruction of their white matter. Then there's people who are just hardcore MS, and maybe the Shoemaker protocol doesn't offer much for them, and they have those white matter lesions around the ventricles of the brain. And then there's people who have both. And when we treat the CIRS, the MS gets better, but they still have MS. And so it's so interesting to think how many ankylosing spondylosis patients are actually CIRS, and then how many are we going to find in the future that there's this chronic inflammatory hybrid going on for people. But I think you're just a testimony to rheumatology really needs to learn how to do a VCS, ask cluster symptoms, and consider moving to confirmatory labs.
Yeah, and I've been kicked out of a couple of AS groups since because I just tell everyone like, what is the downside of looking into CIRS treatment? Either it'll help you or it won't, and you'll be in the same spot you were before. So why not?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we all feel so comforted. Dr. McMahon wrote that great paper on an alternative means to a diagnosis where you can use just the VCS and the clustered symptoms to diagnose CIRS. And the real reason he did that is twofold, is when you're in a crisis, like when Alan Grunning gets a hurricane running through Florida, you can, set up a little mobile clinic and go around and just sign quick paperwork of release, and do a VCS and cluster symptoms and administer well call. But the other reason Scott did that is because the original case definition published with the Government Accountability Office showed you had to show response to treatment to prove the illness. But when Scott was on a legal case where a moldy apartment building was keeping you sick and this person's almost broke, are they going to be able to move out of that moldy building into a clean place to then prove response to treatment when they're stuck on step one in the exposure? So I think that good on you for like kicking in the door on AS groups and saying, hey, do a VCS, do a cluster symptoms. What have you got to lose? But maybe some biological drugs that come with a lot of side effects and the ability to potentially graduate to a functional quality of life. It's just awesome. Has Dr. Shoemaker heard your story?
I didn't know. I haven't told him about it personally. I did have the pleasure of speaking with him after I finished the Proficiency Partner program, which was just, it was a really meaningful moment for me to be able to speak to the man who created the protocol that saved my life. But I didn't get into specifics about my own case.
Yeah, we're all not getting any younger, but to have him at CIRSx and watch people say, you saved my life, you saved my family's life. He was verklempt. He was overloaded. It was when you let all the data settle and all that. I think that was my favorite part of the conference, is just watching finally, get his roses and his chocolate from the most meaningful thing any physician wants, which is graduating patients. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was a beautiful moment. That was my favorite too.
Barbara, how did you kind of stumbled upon CRS as your underlying?
Yeah. I mean, GI issues mainly. Just that was my life. I think I normalized it, and then maybe 2018, 2019 is when I started looking into diet and lifestyle changes. I did paleo, I did Whole30, GAPS diet. I started working out. I did all kinds of things, and none of that worked. September of 2020, I was diagnosed with SIBO. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. Did some treatment, didn't really feel better. But around the same time, I got pulled into like the carnivore space and started researching that. So I did carnivore. About 6 months in, I still wasn't better. I carnivored harder, cut out more different types of foods, stuck with beef, like did all the things. Still wasn't better. So I think a year in, I think I was just whining online generally about still having symptoms. And that's about the time where Jacie was also at the worst of her illness. And we were friends at the time already. And I watched her decline. I never had such a severe case. I wasn't ever bedridden or walking with a cane. There was nothing visually on the outside you could tell was wrong with me, other than maybe I was late to meetings because I was in the bathroom, something like that. But once I did start treatment, I didn't even realize the fatigue that I had until it was gone. And I thankfully felt those differences within like 6 to 8 weeks of the full dose of Welchol, which was awesome. So that was very impactful. I still am struggling with GI issues, and I've been like kind of off and on CIRS treatment, doing the Shoemaker protocol for a couple years now. But I think something this year, we replaced our HVAC system. We've been doing better cleaning. There's just some things lurking in my home that I didn't catch until later. And we had to do some extra testing. And something I always recommend to people if they stall out like I did is do something like the Genie test, because that indicated for me my issue was endotoxins. And I was able to then pinpoint that issue within my house, and I think made a big difference.
We got a lot of educational opportunities coming up, but in 3 weekends, which will be the November 9th for the Colorado Association of Naturopathic Doctors, my talk is sewer gas as a cause of brain atrophy. And for our listeners who don't know what endotoxin means, and if you're hanging out with the CIRS group, you know that by now, but endotoxin is poop, caca, doo-doo, manure, stool, killer boxes, old yeller pooping in the carpet, which you shouldn't have in the first place, dried out P-traps, ruptured sewer main line backups, diaper pails. What about memory care and having lots of adult diapers?
Nearby farmland too, or composting next door, or lots of other things, right? There's a few different weird places that can come up.
Yeah, we just relaunched CIRSx, and the under references or resources is the previous conferences, and the Frisco conference is up.
Nice.
And me and Mike Schranz gave the talk on endotoxin this year, and it's a great talk to just watch inspector's perspective of where's the endo coming from? Where's endo, not where's Waldo? And then, oh my gosh, in 30 years of healthcare and 20 years of private practice, this is the number one driver of brain atrophy in our clinic. And that you're finding endo, I was going to ask you, have you done a plumber smoke test on your place yet?
No, I haven't. But my endo scores were 130 on the ground floor and 100 on the upper floor. So just on the edge of okay. There is a drain that I think the P-trap had dried up. So we fixed that. And I run water in that regularly now. And the issue, which I don't know how many times people talk about this, I think was my washing machine. It smelled bad. It's a top loader. But my boyfriend was very kind. He decided, well, also our clothes weren't getting clean. It was gross. So he pulled out the washer, got it out in front of our house, took it apart. It was disgusting under there. It was it smelled like sewage. It was awful. And that's what we were washing everything in. Everything. So that's gross, guys. But we cleaned it completely. He put it back together. He cleaned it, I should say. I actually was getting kind of lightheaded out there with it. Put it back together, and it's been great. I think that was a really big missing piece for us, and probably the source of the endotoxin, because it is on the ground floor where the score was a little bit higher. So I think that's part of it. Just to be safe, though, we did also replace the garbage disposal and the dishwasher, just to make sure everything was top notch, no weird stuff happening with the drains.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a fun.
Yeah, just for
moment.
listeners, when you diagnose CIRS and you have high MMP9 and C4A and TGF-beta and so on and so forth, those don't have specificity for which biotoxin. They're specific for CIRS. So they're specific for chronic inflammatory response syndrome. A brain MRI with neuroquant or a Genie, which shows specific genes that were dormant, turn on from specific environmental influence, whether it's endotoxin or actino or mold, and you can see specificity on a Genie. Now, if you're already on well-called cholestyramine, it can already start pulling down the genetic expression of those specific biotoxin triggers. But in Barbara's case, what I tell patients is the original endotoxin scores that you can get through Envirobiomics was less than 200 to suggest the home was safe. No home will ever be sterile. And then as the data sets grew, Dr. Shoemaker saw cortical gray atrophy plus other nuclear atrophy. If you cut a Twinkie in half, the yellow cake has shrunk a little bit, right? On the brain MRI neuroquant, and then CD14 toll receptor 2 or toll receptor 4 in section 10 on Genie can go up. If you have either one of those, cortical atrophy or endotoxin, even though you did everything you did, I still say we're doing a smoke test. And depending on where you live, it's $500 to $1,200. It's a total racket. It's a total ripoff. But a real quick couple of endotoxin stories is one of Genevieve's patients had a poop pipe to nowhere. They did the smoke test and her wall started smoking. So we had Ecotrek came over and put up containment, and they opened up the wall and there was a poop candle pipe. It looked like one of those dorm big candles melted, but it was fecal material. Another one we had recently was they installed radiant floor heat. We're curing the concrete. I can get behind that, but the contractor forgot to turn off the radiant floor heat, and the kids started seizing in the house, and we found endotoxin on the sewer gas. they melted. This was a upper middle class, super affluent family, and they had 7 bathrooms. They melted 4 wax rings. So when they did the plumber smoke test, the base of the toilet was discharging the theater gas or the
Wow. Yeah.
so it's like I always tell people, if you got it on genie or cortical atrophy, you just finish it. Honey, what do you want for your birthday? A smoke test.
Yeah, yeah. I think I was waiting to see if I got better after doing some of those things before then doing the smoke test. So it might still be on the horizon for me. But yeah, I was fascinated when Michael Strauss was talking about the smoke test on that talk. I mean, it's cool. The fact that you have to call the fire department ahead of time and to tell them, hey, if you see smoke, if somebody calls this in, we're fine. It's
I'm
crazy.
really glad you said that on the podcast. So
Yeah.
remember, call your local fire department. So one of the things we go through at Roots and Branches all the time, and Jen and Dr. Bierke do way more of this, is like, do you treat the SIBO first so you tolerate the well call? Do you load well call? Because sometimes you can't get rid of the SIBO until you start getting in there. And we know that SIBO is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom. And we
Right.
have to say, is your hydrochloric acid intact? Do you destroy your parietal cells that make stomach acid? Are you hypothyroid? You have a big concussion history, blah, 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 motility, motility, motility. How are you threading the needle with the Shoemaker protocol, SIBO treatments, and so on and so forth?
Great question. So I did do a couple treatments, both the conventional antibiotics and the like herbal whatever antibiotics as well, like 2 different attempts, and I did not get better from that. But that was before any well call was introduced, before I even knew what CIRS was. So I haven't tried it since. It may be time to try that. I was also entertaining the idea of like the elemental diet, although I really don't want to do that. I mean, that sucks. Anyone who doesn't know what the elemental diet is, it's basically the liquid they put down the a feeding tube if you're in a coma. It's basically that. It's to keep you alive. It gives you calories, but it's like disgusting. And not fun, obviously. And that's like a 2, 3, even sometimes recommend like up to 4 week protocol. So I have some hesitation. I'm like, come on, Shoemaker protocol, do all the work, please. But I haven't hit VIP spray yet. I'm doing that soon, I think. So I think I'm hoping and leaning into the Shoemaker protocol to kind of solve all of that. But if it doesn't, then yeah, I'll be revisiting all that fun stuff.
So for both of you, one of the number one side effect of well-called cholestyramine is constipation, right? And that's why Dr. Shoemaker discovered it. Those fishermen and Pocomoke folk of Maryland were coming in with this super bizarre multi-system, multi-symptom illness, but they had raging diarrhea. And I tell people all the time, Ciguatera and Pfiesteria seafood toxin is the source of your biotoxin illness. Well-called cholestyramine is perfect because it helps arrest osmotic diarrhea. And that's why Dr. Shoemaker applied it, is to help the diarrhea stop. And then the fisherman came back and said, hey, my tingling and numbness are gone. I can remember my girlfriend's name. I'm not weak anymore. I can lift fishing nets. And he goes, what just happened? What are your guys' favorite approaches to addressing constipation and bowel motility?
Well, I had kind of a different reaction to well call. It made me poop a lot.
Yeah.
So that was like a perk for me because to your point, like for some people who are experiencing diarrhea, it could regulate you. But in terms of recommendations we make to group members, one thing is high dose omega fish oils can be really helpful to tolerating the binders in general and also with the just the poop part. But then magnesium has been a game changer for a lot of people in our group as well.
Yeah, I know I definitely had to play with a little magnesium, but I think JC and I both erred on the side of runs as opposed to constipation anyway. So if anything, the binders were kind of were helping us in that department. But yeah, for people who have the constipation issue, another thing is, if they're more meat-based or meat-oriented, higher fat content, adjusting macros, there's always ways to play with your diet to, I guess, help that process along. But some people, carnivore actually is not helping them for whatever reason, and maybe they reintroduce some low starch carbs to get things going again. Every body is different, unfortunately. Well, fortunately and unfortunately. And you kind of have to self-experiment a little bit. Even with the magnesium, like I remember I just started with like one a day, and I remember that was maybe just a little too much, so maybe I do like one every other day, or like you have to play with the amounts, otherwise you do, tips it over a little bit too much. So it's all a big experiment, I suppose.
Yeah, it was amazing to watch a whole bunch of carnivore barnstorm our clinic, and these were hardcore, tried and true carnivore patients. And when you look at the Shoemaker biotoxin pathway, I tell them all the time, what we see carnivore do through clinical observation, we haven't published on yet, is we see it reduce the inflammatory cytokines. So
Yeah.
it brings down MMP9, C4, and TGF-beta, and that is huge. I mean, you can take someone out of a headache or away from suicidal ideations from neuroinflammation, or their skin can clear up and whatever the flavor of the day is. It does not fix all the downstream stuff below the hypothalamus from that reduced
Right.
MSH, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
fix ADH, it doesn't fix MSH. And once in a while, we just needed to bulk some of the carnivore. So we would do like a teaspoon to a tablespoon of psyllium or organic ground flax refrigerated, or some sun fiber, and the guar gum product, and just have them mix it up and pound it just to get, because I love magnesium for the motility, but just to get a little bit of scrubbing bulk
Sure.
going there. Um,
Right.
do you see that in the carnivore community, adding a little bit of, like you said, tolerable, lower plant toxin vegetables as a good move once in a while when they're on CSM or well call?
Yeah, I would say an interesting thing about carnivore, to your point, is it is a low inflammatory diet. So in my mind, there's almost a bias in the carnivore community towards people being unwell. You have to be pretty unwell to want to just eat meat. And so I do wonder if the, 25% of the population has the genes for CIRS, but is that overrepresented in the carnivore community just by the fact that the diet helps control the symptoms of CIRS? And so in the carnivore community, what we see is a lot of people who carnivore harder, like Barbara said, where they're just trying to lower their inflammation to a level where they're not experiencing those symptoms. And we see that as a positive and a negative. It's positive because they're reducing their inflammation, but it's a negative because they're not addressing the root cause. So in the carnivore community, I would say no, they're not open to introducing carbs. But in the CIRS community that eats carnivore, they're much more open to it because they're pursuing something different. They're not just trying to manage their symptoms, they're trying to get to that root cause healing. And especially for people who are experiencing hypometabolism, which can be identified on the genie, it can be helpful to what I call supplement carbs so that you have that easy energy source. You're not having the lactic acid buildup that you would be otherwise.
Yeah, I have to clarify that for our listeners, because you just ABP took a dump on dropping some science. That was awesome. So molecular height metabolism for our listeners is a fancy way to say chronic fatigue from CIRS. And when you have chronic fatigue from CIRS, you can't get a glucose log into the mitochondrial fire pit to make 33 to 35 units of energy. And we challenge, can you even get a ketone into the mitochondrial fire pit? Because on molecular height metabolism, those translocases, that translocator bring a ketone across the mitochondrial wall, might not be working. So Dr. Shoemaker, when he first discovered that, would tell some of our patients, well, you should just eat some jelly beans, because he's not a naturopath or an integrated provider. And they
Pick
would
a better candy, Dr. Shoemaker. Get a Kit Kat or something. I'm
there
just
you go.
kidding. I'm just
But
kidding.
no joke, they would go get some organic, like dye-free, beet colored jelly beans, and they would feel better. And we're like, wow.
Okay.
And the reason is making 8 units of energy is better than none. Making 33 to 35 units of energy per glucose molecule burned is wildly better. But I really appreciate, I really want people to take home that there's a chance you might not be able to make energy off anything that's putting you in ketosis. And if you're on carbohydrate, you make 8 instead of 33 to 35. And they still got to deal with all your GI issues, and we're compassionate about that. But I think that is a total gift to share to the carnivore community. As a naturopath, I know my own community can be guilty of building orthorexia or perfect eating. So my favorite thing about getting to the bottom barrel underlying causes is using lion diet or carnivore diet as a therapeutic diet with this expansive hope of someday I can, eat some kale or, have
Kale, really? Kale would be the thing?
Jacie and I
Not
both had the
cake, not ice cream,
same
kale.
look on her
for
face.
sure. But you got to understand, if you're just on lamb and hamburger, kale is like pretty sexy.
Hey,
No,
remember you
can't
just said
relate.
the orthorexic crowd. So yes, these are people who
Yes.
are like, yeah, kale with massaged kale. I want that.
That's right. Kale chip. Yeah. We had one of my classmates, Ravi Chandi Ramani. I'm going to try and get him the CIRSx in Tempe, Arizona. They had to do a public health thing when we were at Bastyr, and he was super sexy, handsome, hunky guy. And someone caught a picture with kale in his tooth, and they made all these posters that said "crazy, sexy kale," and he was
No,
like, it was like the best public health ad ever. So.
oh, that's great.
Yeah. So what do you think about how long you see people doing carnivore before they can expand, Barbara, if they find the underlying cause is CIRS and it's actually going well with their buildings?
So how long should they? What was the question?
Like if someone says, "Hey, I find some inflammatory relief from carnivore,
Oh, sure. Yeah,
but
yeah.
I kind of feel stuck here, but now I got diagnosed with CIRS. And I
Got
know
it.
the reason I need a potent therapeutic diet is because I have chronic inflammatory response syndrome." And
Right.
then they actually get their house to pass endotoxin, actino, and an ERMI. How long do you guys wait until if someone's really jonesing to expand their diet to open that up?
I mean, what we always say is again, everyone's different. So experiment. If there's one food that you just, and hopefully it's not like, don't go straight to chocolate ice cream, but to our point, like, and I don't think it'll be kale either, but I'm trying to think of maybe it's, no, rice isn't good either. Blueberries. We usually talk about those. Like, okay, maybe it's a fruit, a low starch fruit. Try that. Just that one fruit this week. Don't add anything else in. But kind of to your point, carnivore is such a great elimination diet. And an elimination diet is meant to be temporary in the hopes that your health and your resilience builds to the point where you can go to a party and eat what everyone else is eating and go home and you're fine. And then, yeah, you go back to carnivore, you go back to meat based or whatever you're doing. But those like little social events, your kid's birthday party, you can have a slice of cake and you're not going to die from that or like be in like mass amounts of pain. Like you want that resilience. Everyone should want that, you don't want, unless you absolutely love just eating steak and you are totally happy with that. Some people are great. But really the goal should be feeling as best as you can and allowing also for the mental health side of things too. You don't want to deprive yourself to such an extent that you're not enjoying any food that you're eating because that's also going to be really hard to stick with. And then you are going to just totally fall off the rails and go get a pizza and drink some beer and then really, you're not doing good. So,
End up
I
in the
mean,
ER.
yeah, yeah,
If you
exactly.
go that.
No. And but some people, have that like if I can't do it perfectly, then I'm just not going to do it at all. That's super common. And so as a coach, from like that coach mindset, you have to meet your client or meet whoever you're talking to where they are. And if they can just adjust slightly, like even for me, I'm trying to, in my sparkly cup, I'm trying to drink more water and less of my actual vice, which is Coke Zero. But I've told myself, okay, I'm not going to just not drink Coke Zero, even though I know it's bad for me, but I'm going to at least, how about I drink a whole thing of water in between my Coke cans? Like you got to find little ways of marrying the absolutely ideal with real life. And that's what I'm a big preacher of. Jacie, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope.
Well, I do,
Sorry,
and that
Phoenix.
is thank you for sharing with the world that you have a Coke Zero vice
Oh
because
my God, yes.
a lot of times the people who fortunately get to that CIRS diagnosis are already kind of anti-ager kind of desperate, not the healthy anti-ager, but like the person who's been searching for health for a long time. And I think there's this other section of America that's also flirting with type 2 diabetes and does drink Coke and pop and Mountain Dew, and they deserve access to the underlying cause of CIRS and a screening too. So I think it just makes you guys so real. And no, I don't wish a Coke Zero habit on you. And I also feel like you guys, it's just part of what I love about the CIRS group, which is you're just so approachable. There's not a judgmental bone that I've felt people feel, and you're just trying to bring support, leadership, and clarity to graduating from chronic illness. So I so appreciate that moment of sharing.
Yeah, I just
I
happen
mean-
to have them here.
We can become judgmental. If you come at us with a urinary mycotoxin test,
There
we,
we
we
go.
might become a little judgmental.
I just call that flexing.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
and I do love that about you. And that is the best definition of judgment, is you're using data-driven, peer-reviewed judgment to guide people into a standardized, consistently victorious approach to mold and biotoxin illness. And that's what it's all about. How many people get to you guys and have spent $100,000 on nothingness and now don't have $40,000 to remediate a crawl space?
Yeah.
It's so good on you for being authentic and honest. So what is the other thing I think you both really understand is the mental and psychological state of this illness. Can you all speak to, hey, if you got depression, maybe you want to look into CIRS. If you got anxiety, if you got OCD, if you just had a bipolar rant, maybe you should do a VCS and cluster symptoms. What are you seeing in the CIRS community in regards to how it impacts mood and emotional wellness?
I know for my own story, I was carnivore before I had CIRS. So I have kind of an interesting journey towards CIRS and carnivore. But I had OCD, debilitating OCD for years. I was diagnosed when I was 16, and I tried antipsychotics, I tried therapy, I tried all of these things to try and control it in my young adulthood. And when I say it was debilitating, just to put a little bit of color behind that, I would check that my door was locked and then go down to my car to like leave for work. And then I'd be like, did I lock my door? And I'd go back to my front door and then back to my car and back to my front door, logically knowing that the door had to have been locked or I wouldn't have walked away. And I would do that 50 times, 100 times until I just was so anxious I couldn't go to work. So for me, finding carnivore, I thought it was this answer to my OCD, because it was finally this thing that was able to lower my inflammation enough that I didn't have those obsessive thoughts all of the time. And now that I know about CIRS, I think I was actually experiencing CIRS before I realized it with the OCD. And that going through the CIRS protocol has helped with my mental health, not only with the OCD, but also when I was in pain and depressed, I would say. I had suicidal ideation. And just for anyone who's experiencing that out there, I think that's a very normal thing. If your brain is trying to escape a situation, it's going to give you any possible solution. And suicide is not a solution, but it makes sense that your brain would give you that option and make you think that option was viable to you. And that was my experience, was I began to think that option would be viable to me. But going through the protocol, and I would say even finding out that there was this clinically proven path to healing gave me so much hope and so much relief from that cycle of thoughts that I was in. And then going through the protocol really helped to alleviate a lot of my depression. I will say that like 6 months into the protocol, I was still kind of stuck in these neural pathways that had been developed from the chronic illness. And at that point, I started incorporating some limbic retraining, and that was a game changer for me. Where I would previously just default to these negative neural pathways, I started developing new neural pathways, and they were more positive. And so now I'm a much happier person, both through the Shoemaker protocol and that limbic retraining.
Yeah, and I will add, because I think I mostly just talk shit on carnivore earlier, but I will say the reason that I did stick with it as long as I did, 6 months, a year, and then eventually 3 years, is because though it did not resolve my GI issues, which was my main reason for coming to the diet, it did alleviate some fatigue, it did make me happier. Like I was prone to bouts of depression, certainly of anxiety. And I will notice, to this day, I notice if I am not eating more of a carnivore way of eating, that anxiety and the depression do kind of kick back up. So that is, again, I'm still going through the Shoemaker protocol. So I have hopes that that will do more like real resolution of root cause. But in the management phase, eating more meat-based, as clean as I can, is better for my mental health on that side of things as well. So, yeah, I definitely, if that helps people, like finding a way of eating that does not exacerbate those mental health things. Lifestyle, though, Jacie mentioned limbic retraining. If you find things that you love to do them. Like I have people, I do business coaching also. And of course, I have clients who struggle to relax. Like they really don't feel like they can ever just sit and play a game or sit and listen to music or read a book or take a walk that isn't related to their business or related to something productive. I had to learn that too. So even just making a list of things you just purely enjoy for the sake of enjoying them that are not productive at all and leaning into those and trying to get yourself to do those, that it requires a mindset shift, but it's very important. And I think that goes towards that limbic retraining that Jacie was talking about as well.
But just to speak more to the experience of our group members more generally, I think it's one of my favorite parts of the group is to watch people come in and they are really in it. You know, they are mid-CIRS, they've just been diagnosed, they have this fire hose of information trying to learn everything they can. They're in pain, they're depressed, going through all of these things. And then over the months, we'll see them in the group calls and suddenly they're speaking and you can tell that their cognition is better. You can tell that they're more hopeful. You can tell that they're like seeing the light at the end of this tunnel. And it's just the most inspiring, amazing thing. And it's such a blessing to be able to be a part of those journeys and see people really heal.
I can only imagine how connected you get with your groups. You know, it's really like seeing a friend you want the world for. Get it. And to your comments on suicide, I mean, I've been pretty open with podcasts before that my main symptoms of CIRS are fatigue and depression, and then depression can trip into suicidal ideations despite living a charmed life. And there's no situational reason for those thoughts. It's just neuroinflammation talking. And I remember my prayer used to be, it's just the biochemistry, amen. Right? It's not a personality disorder. It's not a spiritual crisis. It's just the biochemistry, amen. And talking with Dr. Shoemaker earlier when we were reviewing genies, the tubulin A1A and the tubulin 1, those are the two genes. When they go up, they destroy tubulins in your brain. And tubulins are the tubes that deliver ions and nutrients. And if you blow up a bridge, just like trying to get supplies into a war-torn region, you don't get the supplies, and then the brain cell just atrophies and dies. The tubulin people with the FKBP5 people, and we know that's the trauma gene, and the trauma gene made it on the genie because it was statistically higher in the CIRS genies than in the healthy control genies. And what I always tell people is the Shoemaker protocol doesn't treat the FKBP5. We do have 7 genies that show Gupta, Dispenza, and DNRS did turn off the FKBP5 gene. So what I just said is a gene sits there dormant and still you get traumatized. And trauma doesn't titrate on this gene. And if you've had super intense rape trauma, or if you're just in a super snickety, emotionally abusive marriage, doesn't matter, both can turn on. But those 3 in a very small data set of 7 did turn off the FKBP5. Where we get in trouble is where people think DNRS or Gupta or Joe Dispenza can clear your crawl space of water damage building molds, right? And so I don't know why people need to be more than you are. If you have a method that can turn off a gene that is making chronic inflammation, that is a miracle, and that deserves to be celebrated. You don't need to be more than that. Celebrate, right? But Tommy could have told me I'm ugly on Facebook 20 years ago, and I have joint pain today from turning on that gene. That's how crazy that is, right? So I know some people do primal trust too. I'm just going to share that a lot of our patients, about 20%, they can't get into any of those programs because they're too time intensive and they're actually triggering for some of our folks. Others love them, and I love all those programs. What we've been doing with them is qigong and tai chi. And I realize some people need movement meditation. They need to be doing something before they sit still. They can do something and get
That's
lost
me.
in the moment, right? And then maybe I can move into that. Or maybe, you know, I don't know if anyone's done a Yang style short form Tai Chi. We had to do it as acupuncture the best year. You do it for 30 days, you get high as a kite. You're just like, wow. So I just say for our listeners, like if you're really struggling with like the sitting still retraining stuff, sometimes just do like a quiet, potent, um, you know, some of the classics. Maybe it's a yin yoga or a short form 7 minute. But anyway, the Tai Chi has been awesome for those folks to kind of get a break from
Yeah.
their brain, their intrusive thoughts, their OCD, their anxiety, their, like you said, Barbara, you just gotta be able to do something that doesn't feel like I'm trying to heal or be productive or, you
Right.
know, create a business or whatever the deal is. Just
Yeah. No,
enjoy.
hot yoga, well, and it's iffy depending on the facility that it's in, but that's been because it's hot and it's yoga, so my brain cannot travel anywhere else other than I need to hold this pose and I'm sweating and this sucks and but it's good to be like grounded in that moment. And so even and some people like the sauna or some other, you know, biohacky kind of things or cold plunge. I wouldn't, but if you like that sort of thing, go for it because that will ground you. And when I say that, I mean, you know, you are forced to be present in your physical body in that moment. And that is something that I think as chronically ill, we kind of learn to dissociate and we try not to feel things. And I think uh, all of that is important in the process. And one thing that I tend to say a lot, the first year of Shoemaker protocol treatment, I actually spent more money on therapy than the protocol. And the protocol is expensive, but I spent more on therapy because I knew my mental health needed that level of weekly support with a psychologist to make sure that I was processing trauma, processing what I was going through, all the things. So I always recommend that. And we actually, I know we'll plug it soon, but the CIRS Summit this year, one of the panels that we did that I got to moderate was a grief panel with therapists and people that are knowledgeable on both that side of the issue as well as CIRS, talking about how all of that worked together. I'm very excited about that panel and everyone getting to see that. So that should be available this December for people to watch if they're interested.
What you two inspire me so much because you're in the trenches with the people is you do a podcast on this and in the comments you're going to say I'm not a richie, I can't afford that. And 9 times out of 10 those patients could have afforded it if it wasn't for misinformation and nonsense and the 10 IVO zones they did and the 2 saunas they own and blah blah blah. And I'm not anti-sauna, but you don't have sauna deficiency syndrome, right?
Right, right.
As your underlying cause. It's just a bonus that releases heat shock proteins and gives you some anti-inflammatory properties. Great. You two keep people on track. So my hope is that instead of someone getting to us when they spend 75, 100K, 300K on everything from, and again, I'm pro therapy, but codependent therapy on codependent body work, on codependent adjustments, and we're not saying why aren't the adjustments holding, right?
Right.
That if they can hit CIRS group first, a lot of the resources, it's still a burden is there for that 10% who truly are socioeconomically destroyed before they wasted money on nonsense. We're working with Chris and Aaron Tim Martin on the CIRS project, and I have very good news that within about a year, there's going to be about 100 transitional housing homes, and then they're going to try and scale that to hit multiple places. So and that's through our 501c, the Roots and Branches Charitable Fund, and the CIRS Project, which is a 501c, and we're really trying to make it so no one has any excuse left for why they can't appropriately do the Shoemaker protocol. And the most expensive, complicated, valid excuse is step one, remove patient from biotoxic exposure. So I can't wait until we say, like, come over here, we got this private shower over here. When you're done, you're going to have all these clean clothes that you didn't bring from your 15 past water damaged houses, and you're going to be done with step one. Boom. And then we hope to collect data on that at such an undeniable place where we could publish on high impact journals to make Shoemaker protocol undeniable. Right. So now maybe we do
That's
get
so exciting.
better insurance coverage for labs and so on and so forth. So you guys are bringing the good news and the honest data-driven truth to the people. And you got roped into big leadership roles at the CIRS Summit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the CIRS Summit is going to be a virtual summit. The headliners, the speakers that we have, it's a, I want to use the word smoke show, and I know that's not appropriate. What is the word I'm looking for, Barbara?
I'm distracted.
I'll
Now
go
it's
old
just
school and say it's off the shizzle.
Yeah,
It's
there we
off the
go.
shizzle.
Yeah,
We
it-
have
yeah.
like the to steal your word from earlier, juggernauts of the CIRS community. So Dr. Shoemaker himself is going to be a speaker. We have just amazing headliners, amazing speakers, but it's really incredible because it's going to be patient facing. So all of the talks are really meant for patients. And we have curated the talks so that we can make sure that there are takeaways that the patients can immediately implement from those talks.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And Dr. Dorninger is going to be one of the speakers as well. So yeah, truly all of the juggernauts, jugger. Anyway, and yeah,
Kick
Dr.
this illness in the ass, people.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
it'll be a fun online summit. It is December 1st through the 6th of 2024. It will be played live and available for free. You can also purchase it to replay for yourself later, but it is available for free to those who sign up over at thecirssummit.com. And that will be, I'm just really excited. The whole reason Jacie and I started doing a podcast is because we felt that all of the really great CIRS information that was out there, most of it was by doctors for doctors, most, and at the time. And so we have seen in the last couple of years that change, thanks to you too, Dr. D. Like this podcast itself, like everything is shifting to be more patient focused, which is awesome. We want patients to have the knowledge and feel empowered to advocate for themselves and maybe even bring CIRS awareness to their own doctor. Maybe they have an open-minded doctor that just doesn't know about CIRS yet. I mean, if we could get more doctors to screen and treat and use the Shoemaker protocol, I mean, there's too many clients, unfortunately, too many patients to go around. So we need more doctors, I would say. So all of this is, I think, helpful for the cause of spreading awareness and empowering patients and getting more doctors on board.
Yeah, let me tell you what you guys are doing. So many of my patients brought their doctor the original Mold Warriors. This is before Surviving Mold, and said,
Nice.
I have this. You need to read this. And they would hand their doctor a 590-page book, right?
Oh,
You
no.
think that doctor is going to go home that night and learn this? We can't even get them to really dive into like a 50 slide deck, right? So I think you guys offer this catalyst, and I want to clean up some of those details. It is the CIRSsummit.com, the CIRS summit.com. And then there's a place where you can log in and do your registration and all that stuff. You can also see the speaker list there. I mean, Dr. DiTullio, our favorite Dr. Musto, a lot of the great indoor environmental professionals. Of course, Dr. Shoemaker, Dr. McMahon, Dr. Grunning, who's just the heart and soul of trying to get low-income patients with CIRS graduated and so on and so forth. And the way this goes, because I've seen these before, is you can watch them that day, or they'll be available for 24 hours. And my favorite thing is they're all interviews. And a lot of our CIRS patients, when they're cognitively challenged, do really well. Just kind of listen to a podcast style format, and then they can take the 2-3 takeaway notes. Then it's going to be released as recordings that you can buy later, and all of the profits go to CIRS research. So this isn't some kind of get rich quick scheme, and all the people who are speaking are the heart and soul, who aren't. I'm not getting paid, and I don't want to get paid. You can just donate my speaker fee to the research fund, and then we have some really good sponsors there too. Aeroasis, Joe Muster, of course, Microbiology DX, Envirobiomics, PD Labs, Mold Inspection Sciences. I know all donated, and that's because they want the world and the community to get good, clean education. So when they get to your house, you're like, we fog bombed it with ozone. You're like, no. And you should have listened to the CIRS Summit. So we really appreciate your two in major leadership role. It always is more than you think. If you have any complaints, don't send them until you run your own conference. Once you run a conference, then you're allowed to complain. No, teasing. The lineup is great. The organization is great. The website looks amazing, but it's really meant to be patient-centric, where it's very digestible, very simple, very practical, and also things that you can challenge politely. An inspection or a remediation or a doctor's perspective or your friend's perspective. Do it all with grace, do it all polite with love. We're not here to beat each other up, but we are here to challenge each other to get to the truth that saves the patient time, money, and energy. How can we get to the underlying cause as quick as possible? And that is also a great prelude to a really beefing up, to use the carnivore term, the CIRSx conference this year from a patient's perspective. It's going to be something for everyone, Gesundheit. But CIRSx is June 5th to the 8th. And I'm sure CIRS Group and myself and all the other educators will start posting out on the gram. But that's going to be in Tempe, Arizona at a brand new construction Omni Hotel, June 5th to the 8th. And even though it does get 100 degrees during the day when we'll be inside, it comes down to 65 at night. So don't be scared. And we'll all ride Lime scooters and get some good tequila at outdoor bar and whatever else you're allowed to do or not allowed to do. But we will be dropping knowledge for legal, for indoor environmental professionals, healthcare professionals, coaches, but also the patient. And everything, again, is meant to be practical. So I think the CIRS Summit is the place to start. And then if you really want to heighten your education or just be a part of the community of people who are trying to make a difference in healthcare and change what you have to why you have and graduate you instead of turn you into a grubby disease management patient and try and sell you drugs for the rest of your life, come hang out at CIRSx. Do you all have any other last parting thoughts? And can you drop again, how do people get in touch with you? How do they become part of a group with CIRS Group, your handle, where to find your podcast?
Well, sorry, I jumped in. I do want to first acknowledge, though we are leadership roles for the CIRS Summit, we want to give a shout out to the rest of that committee putting it together. Glenn DiTullio, Dr. Peg's husband, is really the one who thought of the whole idea to begin with. So he is awesome. Our good friend, Christian Navarro Torres, he is also going to be interviewing a lot of the speakers for that. And then Jenny Johnson, who we love and adore. And we haven't really had a chance to interact with her and work with her as closely as we have now with the summit. So that's been a joy. So all of us putting in a lot of time and effort, and all the speakers are donating their time as well. It's just been a beautiful gathering of people who just want to empower patients and get them the knowledge that they need to advocate for themselves and get healthy. So yes, sorry, go ahead, Jacie. That's all I wanted to add.
I was just going to say, for any CIRS patients listening, like, you are the leading edge. This is still very new information and it's still evolving. In the time I've been a CIRS patient, the information has been evolving. And so you have to educate yourself, you have to advocate for yourself, and hopefully we can give you resources to make you feel more empowered in that. But if you feel like I do, hopefully the goal is that someday CIRS will be so well known that your kids and your kids' kids will never have to experience CIRS because you pushed that leading edge so far forward through your bravery and courage and diligence in getting through the protocol. So just yay you, good job. So proud of you. Thank you for being here.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, in some salt of the earth, Glenn and Peg DiTullio, all they do for the CIRS community academically, for the patient, being on boards, trying to change public policy. So like you said, Jacie, maybe there's a day where a kid gets to go to a kindergarten that's not water damaged and so on and so forth. Christian Navarro Torres, I think, is doing super exciting, commonsensical stuff for
Awesome.
boots on the ground patient experience. And then Jenny Johnson, we've been referring to her groups as well for years. And
Yeah.
I just see you two as this generation of corralling, helping people graduate, letting the true screening, confirmatory, and treatment knowledge ripple so that young, 21-year-old woman with migraines of 9 years all of a sudden goes, oh my gosh, I don't have to have headaches the rest of my life. And then they in turn bump into someone else who's just been revolving around healthcare on funk med, integrated med, naturopathic med, conventional med, all of them. And all we need to do is say, hey, do a VCS, cluster symptoms, and ask about biotoxin exposure. So
Yeah,
it's
sure.
the beginning of the end. And every patient who attends the CIRS Summit will be a part of that. Pay it forward. It's a great thing to bring up, Jacie. We appreciate our patients as the best. We won't want to call them diagnosticians, maybe, but screeners, right?
Yeah.
They really help pull people out of this healthcare trauma and suffering of no answers. So
Absolutely. And of course, for us in our group, the CIRSgroup.com, you can join us over there. And we're at the CIRS Group anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. We generally put something out every week. And Jacie, am I missing anything?
No,
your
just thank you so much for having.
your Instagram's awesome. Your
Oh,
Instagram,
yeah.
We have an
Yes.
Instagram.
yeah,
Yes. The CIRS Group or at the CIRS Group. Yeah.
at the
The
CIRS,
CIRS Group
yeah.
everywhere. Yeah.
I love those posts. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thank you guys for all you're doing for this community and looking forward to the summit.
Yeah. I can't wait. Thank you so much.
Thank you.